from a Roman perspective, as in from a Catholic perspective, because Catholic just means universal, right?
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, they were creating a universal religion, and it could have been one or the other. And it would have been one or the other. However, no self-respecting Roman emperor could possibly accept that the establishment of his universal church, the figurehead of his universal church, would be an Iranian god.
Test the claim.
So I understand that you want to be inducted into the cult of Mithras. Is that right? You may get that mic on if you want to. If you want to repel my.
So what? No. I'm not really interested in the cult of Mithra.
Cult of Mithras. No? But do you find it interesting how its symbolism has found its way into common usage?
I do. But like people just recycle stuff in it. It's common for people to reuse, reduce, recycle.
But you would imagine God wouldn't do that.
I mean, God works in mysterious ways.
There's another symbol of Mithraism in plain sight in the Western world. When Mithraism was suppressed in the Roman Empire, it went underground, and it's thought to have a lot of its practices are thought to have gone into like secret societies. And Mithraism was a mystery cult anyway, so it's not like there are scriptures to be found laying around anywhere. But it found its way into secret societies, and its symbols are hidden in plain sight. So, for example, Bartholdi, who was a French sculptor and the designer of the Statue of Liberty. Yeah. Now, Mithras, who is considered a solar deity, is often flanked by torchbearers. One of the rites of ascension in the cult of Mithras is called the rite of the nymphus, or the rite of the bridegroom, which would involve a male adherent dressing as a bride.
It's like a drag.
So, if I was to say to you that the Statue of Liberty is not Lady Liberty, but is an effeminate man in a woman's robe, because Mithras is actually somewhat androgynous. So Mithras' name in the Iranian-speaking world is Mitra, and Mitra is typically a woman's name.
Okay.
However, there's an alternate, which is Meh, which is some androgynous. It could be a prefix to a man's or a woman's name. So Mithras was also depicted in the Roman world as wearing a diadem crown, like a tiara, a crescent diadem,
Spiky.
with emanating rays of the sun.
Yeah.
Again, very much like our Lady Liberty.
Lady.
So I feel reasonably confident that the Statue of Liberty is actually Mithras.
So Mithras ain't neither male nor female.
Which is kind of interesting given the current state of things in like modern society as well.
Trying to blur the line, you mean? Yeah. Yeah, no, so this Mithras, neither male nor female, it's a bit like Satan, right? Satan's like Pan, Satan's not really anything.
It's interesting that you say that. I mean, if you think about in the Abrahamic tradition, Satan starts off just being the adversary. That's what the word means, right?
Yeah. The accuser.
So this goes back all the way to the Garden of Eden, with the serpent leading Eve and Adam astray by tempting them to eat from the tree of knowledge, the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. but it's all relative. Whoever is in opposition to God's or to Yahweh's law will be considered Satan. But from a Mithraist's perspective, Yahweh is the adversary.
So, so that you're basically saying Mithra is Satan.
No, I'm saying Mithra is
with each other.
I'm saying Mithra is the light bringer. Mithra is the one who is okay. Let me use another religious tradition as an analog. Greek mythology. If you take Yahweh as Zeus, as analogous with Zeus, if you're comparing the two traditions, I don't know if you're familiar with Greek mythology. I am only to a certain extent. Okay. Who is the one who takes something to give it to mankind that mankind will be able to surpass even the gods?
Is it Prometheus?
Yes. So it could be argued in a kind of an abstract way that the serpent in the garden is Prometheus, and Prometheus is Mithras. So, and there are some other signs that even to the ancient Greeks, Prometheus was considered somehow connected to the Iranian world. Prometheus' punishment for assisting mankind, for betraying Zeus, for betraying the Olympian gods, is to be banished to Mount Elbrus, which I believe is a cognate of Alborz, which is a mountain range in Iran.
Okay.
I think in the Greek mythology it's described as being in the Caucasus, which is the entry point onto the Iranian plateau of the Aryan people.
Turkey-ish, isn't it? Yeah.
Like Armenia, Georgia, the eastern part of Turkey, the northwestern part of Iran.
Anatolia, yeah.
And like exploring Greek mythology even further, Perseus, who is famous for having slayed Medusa, is said to be the father of the progenitor of the Persian people, Perses. So that's how the Greeks incorporated the Persian world into their own mythology.
So the Persians came first.
But here's the interesting thing. Perseus, when he is depicted artistically slaying Medusa, he's always depicted looking away from her.
Yes.
And the common understanding is that it was because to look into her eyes would cause him to turn to stone. There is no other example in the ancient world of a protagonist slaying his foe while looking away, except Mithras. Mithras in what's called the tauroctony scene, the tauroctony being the killing or the slaying of the bull, which is the most common depiction of Mithras in the Roman world. And there are examples of it even in London, at the London Mithraism, that anybody can go and see. Mithras is depicted almost appearing to ride the bull whilst driving his dagger into it, looking away.
Well, okay.
What that symbolizes is the slaying of the age of Taurus. Because Mithras is considered to be the figure who turns the yoke of time, the yoke of the age. So he slays Taurus to bring about the dawn of the age of Aries.
This is all, isn't that the star signs and that, Taurus and that?
Yeah,
Aries,
astrology was intermingled with a lot of these ancient beliefs.
I'm a Taurus, by the way, so I take it to heart that
taking it personally.
Yeah, somebody slayed me.
And actually, there are depictions of Perseus slaying Medusa in a astrological context. So it will be like on an astrological map. And where you see Perseus slaying Medusa, the foot of Perseus is at Taurus.
Right.
So it's all interrelated. And yeah, like I say, Mithras is probably one of the most underappreciated divinities in the sense of his scope, in the sense of his reach, how broad his influence has been. When I say that, as I mentioned, you have the London Mithraeum. There is a Mithraeum is the temple of Mithras. There is the London Mithraeum. A Mithraeum was discovered as far north as Hadrian's Wall.
What's that?
Hadrian's Wall was like a frontier between, I guess, what we call England and Scotland at the time, built by the Romans, Emperor Hadrian, to keep out the barbaric northerners, basically. So yeah, we have Mithras in the British Isles. Mithras is found all over the Mediterranean. For example, there are said to have been Mithraeum down in Calabria, in southern Italy. But what if I told you that Mithras found his way even as far as Japan?
How?
So in Buddhism, you have a sect or a school of thought called Maitreya Buddhism.
Hang on, sorry. I think I'm gonna have to. Oh no, it's not. I just missed the call. Yeah, no. Yeah, you're saying sorry.
Yeah, Maitreya Buddhism. Have you heard of it?
No.
So-
I've only heard of Zen Buddhism.
Okay. So you have Mahayana Buddhism, but one sect is called Maitreya. And this sect is known for the expectation of a future Buddha to come. And that Buddha is Maitreya. And Maitreya is a cognate of Mitra. As in the words are related. It's the same word.
Right.
And to substantiate that, Mitra himself is considered a savior figure. Now, when you look at the visual depiction of Maitreya, just like I described earlier, the crown with the rays of the sun emanating from it, if you check it out, if you Google it, pick images of Maitreya Buddha, you will see those same styling cues. And in Japan, Maitreya is Mihoku, which itself is a cognate of another name for Mithras in the Persian language, Mithraic.
Really? So it goes. Well, yeah, you're right about the reach about Mithras. Flipping heck. So how did it get to Japan? Like, how did it manage to reach it? Like, and what like, when about? What time?
Well, you have to remember that Persia was like at the heart of the trade routes, the Silk Road. So it's not just goods that were kind of taken from east to west along those routes. It was also ideas, teachings, beliefs, and so on found their way, traveled around the world, east and west predominantly. So yeah, Mithraism found its way to Japan and to the British Isles. So it was the thing is, Mithraism in the West is not what it was in the East. So I would shy away from calling it a world religion, but it was certainly a world divinity. It's a divinity that had a huge amount of reach. It was just never coalesced into a single thing, but it never really could have, because it started out as a mystery. Well, at least in the Roman world, it was a mystery cult. It was a mystery religion where nobody was really allowed to talk about it in public. It was something that was done behind closed doors, and that was signified by the act of worship underground. It was an underground religion. In the Roman world, it was the religion of the elite military class. And there were a number of occasions where even the emperors of Rome nearly turned Rome from embryonic Christianity towards Mithraism becoming the state religion. Julian the Apostate apostated from Christianity and returned to Mithraism. But it never really took root. And again, because of this...
Oh, I've heard of Julian. Yeah, Julian, but they call him a pagan, right? Is Mithraism paganism?
Well, again, it's kind of a relative term. So
they call him the last pagan emperor, right?
Well, the followers of Abrahamic religions call everybody who doesn't follow an Abrahamic religion a pagan. So it's just a pejorative term, really. It's not It doesn't signify any particular people. Mithraists didn't call themselves pagans; they called themselves Mithraists, probably. I would say Mithraism was probably on the verge of becoming the Roman state religion until the turning point is considered to have been, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the vision, Constantine's vision of the cross, which is described as having taken place during the Battle of the Milvian Bridge on the outskirts of Rome. I think that's where it is.
Yeah, Milvian Bridge, yeah.
And there's a depiction of the battle outside the Colosseum. And for years and years and years, there was no vantage point from which to see what was carved on the arch, because often these arches would have carvings in them that would depict a scene. And it was known that the scene from the Milvian Bridge was depicted on the arch, but no one had the opportunity to study it. However, a few years ago, they allowed some researchers to take a direct look at it. They found no image of the cross, no images of Jesus. However, they found Mithras. They found Apollo, with whom Mithras was syncretized. And even without going up there to see it, the arch is flanked on all four corners by figures that one could only describe as Mithraic priests. And the telltale signs are that they wear what's called the Phrygian cap. Phrygia.
Oh, Phrygia, isn't that a place near Greece, isn't it?
Yes, I believe that it's also in Anatolia or modern day Turkey.
Phrygia, yeah.
But at the time, these would have been Persian lands. So the Phrygian cap was considered a sign of Iranianness, or the Iranianness of Mithras. And he's often, so in those Tauroctony scenes I was talking about, where he's slaying the bull, he's wearing the Phrygian cap.
Looking away
from the bull. And as I say, on each corner of the arch of Constantine, there is a statue of a Mithraic priest or a mage or magus.
Yeah.
Because magus, which is what the three wise men are described as being in the nativity story, or leading up to the arrival of Jesus. So these are the three wise men who went looking for following the star.
Magi, yeah.
Yeah, they are described in the Greek, in the earliest documents, as being magus, which is magi. And magi is the order of priests, typically thought to be Zoroastrian, but actually it could be a term that is applied to the priests of any one of a number of Iranian religions, including Mithraism.
So it was conventionally three, in the them year one plays. Three non-Jewish
we three kings of Orient are.
Yes.
Yeah, they're said to have been magi from the east.
And they saw Jesus, who
I don't know. I don't know if that was ever confirmed. What the story tells us, I believe, you may be able to correct me, is that I think they when they arrived, they met with Pontius Pilate, and then he's the one who approved for them to, or he sent them to look for this newly arrived king.
Yeah.
So, but they were astrologers. They were following a star.
Yeah, stargazers. Yeah.
It's an assumption that they were looking for Jesus, but it may just have been that there was some astrological phenomenon that was taking place that had caught their attention and had led them to believe that there would be sort of an imminent coming of an important figure. They would also have been awaiting a savior figure, but they would never have called it Jesus. And that's never said to have come out of their mouths anyway.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, it kind of leaves their involvement somewhat open-ended, because they just returned to the east
After seeing this star, yeah.
So
you believe they actually followed this phenomenon?
I don't know if any of it's true. I suspect it may just have been an addition to the story to legitimize the story. Because if the men from the east, the ones most famed for interpreting the celestial signs come and give their stamp of approval, then it legitimizes the story.
So, okay, is Mithras a savior figure?
Yeah, it's considered a savior figure.
Would you say Jesus Christ is the modern day rap music equivalent of Mithras?
I would say, from a Roman perspective, as in from a Catholic perspective, because Catholic just means universal, right?
Yeah.
And so, from my perspective, they were creating a universal religion, and it could have been one or the other, and it would have been one or the other. However, no self-respecting Roman emperor could possibly accept that the establishment of his universal church, the figurehead of his universal church, would be an Iranian god. That in itself, just the fact that it was the Roman elite military class that was worshipping Mithras in itself was a serious national security risk. So they had to somehow supplant or replace or substitute Mithras. But there were plenty of signs that this is what happened. Why is Christmas celebrated at the on or around the winter solstice? Because that's the birthday of Mitra, of Mithras. The end of the longest night of the year is the birth point of Mithras, because he is associated with the sun. So it's considered the rebirth of the sun, which, interestingly, is also now considered the birth of the Son of God.
The sun. Are there any traces of Mithraism in South America, in the New World?
Well, you got to remember that the New World is where Catholicism probably lives like most clearly in people's hearts and minds. So when I say the Catholic Church replaced Mithras with Jesus, that doesn't mean that there was no lingering symbology of Mithras. So again, I mentioned the date for Christmas. Even the Ashen Cross, that was part of a Mithraic ritual. Let me see if I can remember the name of it. I'm not sure. It may be part of the ritual of what's called the ritual of the solar charioteer. So this is the one where Mithras is depicted as crossing the sky in his solar chariot, and this is where, as I mentioned earlier, the military salute comes from. It comes from the ritual being that the adherent would be shielding his eyes from the solar glory, the light radiating from Mithras's chariot.
Right.
So one would shield his eyes. That's where the military salute comes from.
No way.
And I believe that part of that ritual is the application of a cross in ash on the forehead. And the reason for that, again, it's another astrological explanation. Where the celestial equator and the ecliptical of the zodiac intersect is an angle of 23 degrees, and that is symbolized by a cross. The same cross, funnily enough, that found its way onto the Jolly Roger pirate flag, believe it or not.
Oh, the bones, you mean?
Yeah, the skull and crossbones. And we can get to that later. But the cross that was being placed on the head of a Mithraist in ash is that intersection, not a crucifix.
Oh, it's symbolizing the intersection.
The intersection of the celestial equator and the ecliptical of the zodiac at 23 degrees.
So can we see it?
Well, yeah, these are celestial phenomena. So it's more to do with the passage of the stars from our perspective. So the zodiac turns at a certain angle, and then the celestial equator intersects that angle at 23 degrees. But yeah, you can observe all of that. All of that information was acquired through observation.
You mentioned before about there was another intersection, the ictus, the fish.
Oh yeah.
What the heck's that? A vagina in it.
I mean, some people do lower the tone a little bit, but like one hypothesis that I've heard mentioned is that so Mithras is considered a mediator. He's considered in his like more archaic iteration, he was considered the divinity that governed contracts, oaths, and covenants. So that overlap between two circles, let's say two opposing factions, the part where they meet, the part where they intersect, where they overlap, is symbolic of Mithras' role as the mediator between two parties. And therefore, it's thought that that fish symbol may be attributable to beliefs in Mithras. Like another symbol that still exists in the Catholic Church is the hat that the Pope wears.
Oh yeah, the fish thing.
No,
Can I have some of this? Can I have some of this? Do you want some?
No, I've just finished mine, thanks.
Yeah, so the Pope hat, yeah, the big fish.
Oh no, you call it a fish. It's literally called the Mitra, as in Mitre, as in Mithras.
Really? A bishop's hat?
It's called the Mitra. It's named after Mitra.
So all Christians are basically Mithraians, right? Like it all goes back to.
I'm saying Catholicism could have been anything.
They just had to pick the.
They just had to pick their guy, and it was much more of a benign choice, a much less threatening choice, to pick some small cult in a Roman backwater somewhere. In this case, I don't know, ancient Palestine 2,000 years ago, than for the elites of their society to be worshipping the god of their age-old enemy, the other superpower across the border. And the thing is, what people underestimate is that Mithraism didn't get there by accident. It was engineered that way by the Parthians. So the Parthians were the Iranian dynasty, or the Persian empire before the Sasanians, who were the last dynasty before the arrival of Islam in Persia. The Sasanians are the ones that fell to the Arab conquests, but they themselves replaced the Parthians. So the Parthians employed, and this will bring me full circle to something else I mentioned earlier. The Parthians employed a kind of a special operations navy of what do they call them? Privateers or pirates. They were known as the Cilician pirates.
Cilician.
And Cilicia is from the southern coast of Turkey, modern Turkey. So they were on the coast of the Mediterranean, and they were employed by the Parthians to disseminate Iranian religious ideas into the port towns of the Roman Mediterranean.
Missionaries, basically.
But they were pirates in every sense of the word. They are most famous for having taken Julius Caesar hostage.
Wow.
And having won a handsome reward for him. Although my understanding is that he had a huge proportion of them slaughtered as a punishment. However, this is one of the things that they're famous for in Julius Caesar's earlier life. So they were employed to disseminate these Iranian religious ideas into the Roman world as a way to undermine the pre-existing Roman power structure. Basically to get the elite families the elites of the Roman world into basically thinking like an Iranian. However, also just through an influx of manual labor, just people moving into the Roman world also brought with them these ideas. And just kind of as a parenthetical note, Franz Cumont, I believe, is the main scholar of Mithraism. He's like the leader. He's like the source.
Alive today.
I don't believe he's alive anymore,
Okay.
but his writings are probably the most cited on Mithraism. There's also another scholar by the name of who is alive today, thankfully. A woman by the name of Parvaneh Pourshariati. She's a Iranian American scholar.
Sounds very Persian, that name. Shariat. Shariati.
Pourshariati.
Yeah. Very.
And she's written some incredible books. One of which is an investigation into the circumstances around the fall of the Sasanian dynasty with the arrival of the Arabs in the Persian world, and the relationship between the Sasanians and the Persians. And so, going back to the Cilician pirates, where I mentioned that it was Mithraists who were the first to fly the Jolly Roger and bear the flag with the skull and the crossbones, they were the ones who were the first to fly it. And the skull, so it kind of reveals some detail about other Iranian divinities or beliefs. So the skull represents a divinity by the name of Zurvan. Zurvan is the god of fate and time and death. Probably most suitably associated with Kronos in the Greek mythology.
Titan eating his children.
And I believe he's also the father of Zeus and whatnot. So the Titans are also important in the landscape of Iranian religious tradition. So yes, the Titan Kronos would be probably the closest analog for Zurvan.
Right.
And so you have his head, and then you have the cross below it. The cross, as I mentioned, being the intersection of the celestial equator and the how's it going, mate? Please stand in front of my camera.
Oh, right. Are you recording?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's the conversation?
Mithraism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realise you were recording.
No problem.
Yeah, it's an intersection between the equator,
The celestial equator,
Yeah, sit down, bro.
the celestial equator, and the ecliptical of the zodiac.
Yeah.
And basically, the reason that's there, that refers to Mithras, because he's the one who turns the yoke of time. Actually, it's there's a lot of stuff
It seems like there's a lot.
going on in the Iranian religious traditions that have affected the Western world in ways that the average person wouldn't realize.
Yeah, we wouldn't realize. Yeah.
And so I'm beginning to take it upon myself to throw the covers off, so to speak.
Well, here's a good question to for you to reflect on. Why do you think it's so covered up? Why do you think we're so ignorant to it all, as a Western in the West?
What is the easternmost boundary of the Western world?
Well, I don't know, Eastern Europe or something.
The Greeks.
Oh, right, Greece. Yeah.
They are considered the frontier and probably the origins of what it is to be a part of the Western world. The idea of democracy, the idea of
Olive oil,
yeah, of course. How could we live without olive oil?
of course.
But also Greek philosophy and so on. We're all kind of starting points of a new way of thinking, and the West is considered the bastion of sort of forward thinking, so to speak. If that's considered your starting point, how would it benefit you to then give credit to the people who influenced that tradition?
Yeah.
So I don't think it brings any benefit to the Western world to say that what it is to be Western was actually heavily influenced by something quite Eastern.
So were the Greek philosophers, were they kind of spiritual?
Yeah, but how I would answer that question more in context with the conversation is whether or not Greek philosophers were influenced by Iranian thinking.
Yeah.
And I would say that the earliest philosophers, the pre-Socratic philosophers, the likes of Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and then subsequently people who studied in their schools or in their schools of thought, such as Plato, were deeply influenced by, probably more than anything else, Zoroastrian thinking. So Heraclitus, for example, was invited by Darius the Great to become the court philosopher of the Persian Empire. He lived within the boundaries of the Persian Empire, despite being of Greek ethnicity. In fact, he describes his feelings as almost like heartbreak when the Greeks recaptured parts of Greece that were under Persian occupation. In fact, when the Greeks recaptured their own lands, he went to the temple of Artemis for the rest of his life and never came out except to play with the kids who would go there. Is everything all right? Let me just check my camera because it's... Yeah, it's all right. Still ticking along.
Action. Artemis.
Yeah, the temple of Artemis. Heraclitus is... So there are like remnants of his works. And what's been extracted from them is thought to have been hugely influenced by Zoroastrian thinking. And just the fact that he was invited by the Persian king to become the Persian court philosopher suggests that whatever it is that he was thinking or teaching was in line with Persian thought. Pythagoras, who is one of the daddies of them all, so actually when he first came in contact with the Persians in an official sense, he was in Egypt. He was studying the pyramids. He was devising his equations.
Yeah. A squared plus B squared
Equals C squared. Yeah. So when Cambyses I, the son of Cyrus the Great, conquered Egypt, Pythagoras was there. And I think it was kind of light-hearted, but they invited him to have an audience with the king. But just for good measure, they arrested him to make sure he made it. And then subsequently, he ended up living in the Persian Empire for like 10 to 12 years. And that's where he established his school of thinking, the Pythagorean order, almost a cult. Was considered something of a cult. A member of which, or Plato was a member of the Pythagorean order, for example. So to suggest that Greek thinking isn't influenced by exposure to Persian thought would be just to have your eyes closed.
I don't understand how, if everything came from Zoroastrianism.
I don't claim that, but yeah, go on.
And that the Greeks were influenced by spirituality, right?
Well, it depends what you mean by spirituality. The existence of another realm of reality other than the material.
Yeah, and also kind of like having a sense of like knowing yourself. Because the Greek philosophers spoke about the importance of knowing yourself, didn't they?
Sure, yeah.
And I'm sure they thought that knowing yourself goes beyond, oh, I'm a good person, I'm enthusiastic, I'm this and I'm that. There must have been something deeper to what they were saying about knowing yourself. So what was that?
I mean, I think we'd probably have to talk about specifics, about specific teachers or thinkers of the time. But I feel like it's quite a broad question.
He's going to try to evangelize to you now. That's all I'm saying.
But they were all thinking about how to think,
Yeah.
and they were all trying to answer the deeper questions, I suppose.
And I think-
The nature of reality, so
I
to speak.
don't think they would have dismissed spirituality, because the idea of free thinkers is that you're open to something else other than this life, whereas the West is taking the idea there's nothing outside this physical realm.
So where you going with this?
No, I'm just saying. I think the Greek philosophers would have been open to something else.
I think there was a variety of schools of thought. So to say that they were all one thing or they were all open to what it is that you're describing would just be too much of a generalization. I think that there were all sorts of schools of thought, which may have included what you're describing. How's it going? You good? We haven't got another chair, but you wanna make space on your lap. No, I wasn't telling you to get out.
Yeah,
I was saying, you want to sit on?
sit on my lap.
You'll sit on his lap.
Why not? Okay, you can stand here. You can stand here.
Come on, man. We could do some Mithraic stuff, man.
Yeah, Mithraic. He's a Mithraic himself, isn't it? A neo Mithraic.
Yeah. Oh, the Mithraic.
Yeah, aka Catholic.
You're a Catholic, right? Yeah. So Mithraic. Yeah, Universalist.
Not pagan. But anyways, yeah, like, I want to go further. So you mentioned Japan. You mentioned Greece being like the starting point for all Western thought. Let's go further. Let's go even more into the Orient. What about India? You know, you're saying like Abraham's maybe had a connection with the Indus Valley.
Well, do you want to finish up with Mitra in India first?
Go on, yeah.
So, Mitra, as far as I'm aware, Mitra started off as an Indo-Iranian divinity, which means that it was at some point in the Indo-European story, the Indians or the northern Indians and the Iranians were single people.
Okay.
And amongst them,
is that still the case, like genetically nowadays?
I would imagine there is still a trace of that, but that hypothesis is derived predominantly through linguistics. And it could be argued that, for example, modern-day Pakistan was the meeting point or the separation point of those two peoples. So, as the Aryan tribes came down the side of the Caspian Sea, and they split off, and one part of them, the Iranians, went settled on the Iranian plateau, and then the rest of them went into sort of what we consider the Indian world. However, Hindu nationalists tend to reject that narrative nowadays, but it is what it is. So, Iranians and Indians who have beliefs that stem from the Vedic tradition, Hindus, for example, share the idea of Mitra. They are both familiar with this idea. So in the Indian world, Mitra is a synonym for friendship, for happiness. Whereas in the Iranian context, it's considered, like I said, a mediator governing oaths, contracts, and covenants. So you could argue there's something friendship related there, the meeting point of two parties. Before we go further east, let me talk about what I suspect is a Mithraic trope in Islam.
Oh.
So
Careful.
in the Muslim marital procedures, there is an agreement between a husband and wife that infers a dowry, and that is called mahar, which is the name of Mitra, the alternate name of Mitra in the Persian language, mehr. Now remember,
Are you sure? Are
now
you sure
remember-
it's actually the same word, or it's just a similar sounding?
so the word mahar in Arabic comes through Aramaic. Aramaic being the lingua franca of successive Persian empires up until the time of Islam. Now, I haven't been able to find any further etymological trace of mahar from Aramaic, like any further back. So, listen, you could just say it's a coincidence.
Yeah, you could.
But
That's
the
what I'm saying.
covenant that is struck between a husband and wife bears the same name as the divinity that governs covenants, oaths, and contracts in ancient Iranian religious tradition.
Right.
So, if you want to consider that a coincidence, then by all means. But it seems glaringly obvious from my perspective.
Your language gets thrown around, you know. Like gay used to mean something else, you know, several decades back. But
Yeah.
it makes sense.
So, India, right? So I've explained.
Oh,
that,
somebody's
right?
calling me. Sorry, can
Oh,
I
no
just?
worries,
Hey, you take over, yeah. They're talking about India. You can talk about reincarnation with them.
Kiabo, Chris. What you got for me? Welcome. You are now entered the battleground.